Before we start the amazing playthrough, let's introduce Will, who's going to be our interviewer slash host slash facilitator.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for having me.
Will O'Neill is an excellent game designer who has worked on, I don't have your list in front of me, so do you want to intro yourself?
Sure. I'm Will O'Neill, developer of the upcoming Little Red Lie, director of the Wordplay Festival, and my first game, Actual Sunlight, is now available on PC and PlayStation Vita.
Yay!
Yay.
Thank you for doing this with us, Will.
No, it's an honor. Thank you.
All right, let's get started. Oh, should we introduce the other people in the playthrough?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Everyone else should introduce themselves, too.
Yes, let's start with immediately to Will's left.
I'm Suzanne Andrew. I'm the story director for LongStory Game.
My name's Miriam. I'm the executive producer of LongStory Game.
And I'm Heather Jackson. I'm the writer of Episode 3 of LongStory.
And this is our first director's cut playthrough of Episode 3 of LongStory Game. Look forward to more playthroughs of all the episodes following this one.
Awesome.
So should we get started, guys?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, let's pick a character. What should we play as?
So here's the first question, I guess. You know, you guys have really gone out of your way to make this something for everyone, and you give people a lot of options in terms of gender and how they identify. How is that process-wise in terms of how you write the thing? Do you guys think there is a canon, quote-unquote, way to play through LongStory? Or do you go out of your way to make it as open-ended and easy as possible?
As far as, when I was writing, I definitely always considered, I'm like, okay, the player could be any gender, so I tried not to make their dialogue sound, more feminine or more masculine, try to make it pretty neutral so that everybody feels like this could be them.
I think LongStory is all about flexibility and trying things and experimentation, so it gives people a lot of options.
All right.
I
I like Sigmund.
You like Sigmund?
It's a good name.
All right. I was interested when we developed the game, like the first prototype, it was developed with only a female gender plus, representational character. And it was only through feedback from the players that we heard clearly that they didn't want just to have a girl and they also didn't want to just have a boy. And what was interesting is they all wanted the gender to be expressed on a continuum.
The episode begins, of course, with a quick recap from the last one, and we learned that Hannah Jane was actually friends with them, which was kind of the sort of big twist that we've been building up to it until that point. Hannah Jane's an interesting character because you learn this as the fact that, the three of them aren't really bullies. They were actually friends with them, and yet the way they behave is ostensibly kind of mean. Maybe just talk a little bit about Hannah Jane and that twist and the decision to make that kind of the thing where she said it turns out they actually were friends with them all along. As much as you can say without giving any more away.
I think the goal with Hannah Jane was to make the three of them as multi-dimensional as possible, that they start out giving you the impression that they're just awful, but anybody else that you might meet in the world, they have different dimensions to their characters, so there's some good things about them and there's some bad things about them, and they come across in different ways.
Yeah, I wasn't that surprised in a way because there's a certain underlying sort of kindness and sweetness to the world of the LongStory game, I find. It's a little bit closer to John Hughes than the OC. Okay. Do you know what I mean? You got the bratty little kid brother, you have the mom who's very loving, the authority figures who are somewhat bumbling, and yet the game also does address a lot of serious things. And Nora is one of the characters I like a lot because she kind of acts as somebody you can confess to because she's not actually in your life, and yet you guys have described Nora as a potential love interest. Talk about Nora and that relationship between the player character.
I find Nora is interesting because Nora's story didn't really emerge until this summer. We were always a little bit confused about what was Nora's backstory and why was Nora so anti-leaving the house and
homeschooled, yeah.
Yeah, and so I feel like Nora as a person became gelled way more in episode 3.
Yeah.
And not because of anything we're telling people in episode 3, but because we knew why she was at home. So it was much easier to write. Oh no. Oh well. It was much easier to write her to have a specific sort of quality like a specific kind of reason, as opposed to just sort of being like, well, she's at home, maybe she's shy. I don't know, what did you think?
Well, yeah, when I came in onto the project of LongStory, you guys gave me the backstory of Nora, and I knew why she was at home. So the scene where that we're not there yet, but the scene, spoiler, where if you get to the player asking Nora to the dance and she refuses, we knew why, so we were able to get the answers a little bit more mysterious without giving it away, but we knew why she couldn't come, which was interesting, instead of just being vague about it.
Yeah, you're going to have to keep playing to find out more about Nora.
Ask her to the dance to find out.
Yeah, it's easier to have empathy for your characters' lives when you actually know why something's happening. And so a lot of what we did in the first episode was say, okay, well, you have one character that you never get to see because they never leave the house. But we never really figured out why. And so for 2 episodes, Nora just didn't leave the house for no reason. Now we have a reason.
But I think the way you guys approach it even now, it feels really authentic. And I think to a certain extent, we all identify with this idea that maybe who we can compose ourselves as is like a disembodied intellectual person over the internet might be better than who we could present ourselves as in real life. And, so I think there's a lot to relate to her in even now. And even if you're not in that situation, tell me a bit about writing a character like that and the kinds of things you have her say and go for to make her someone that anyone could identify with.
You guys start.
I just think that Nora's realistic for right now because we have like lots of friends online or friends that you talk to just over messaging. And you have entire relationships with people you don't ever really see.
Yeah. And this is in this dialogue we see like it's a real kind of relationship because they can talk about stuff that's going on in real life that you can't actually go to school and talk about because you'd be talking about the people that you're involved in these things with. And I think this is the value these kinds of relationships have for a lot of people. They love them because they get to talk to somebody about what's going on with them without worrying that there's like going to be these horrible consequences.
That's true. That's a really good point.
I wish I had Nora when I was in high school. Somebody
Yeah,
I could talk to
me
that
too.
didn't know any of my other friends.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that when I was little, I had I had cliques that I kept separate. So like I was in a Jewish youth group and then I was at school and I would make quite sure that those groups of friends didn't know each other. So you could kind of not play them off each other, but you could tell one group one thing that you wouldn't tell the other group.
Yeah.
But I was also going to say, I think what's interesting about Nora is that she's one of the only honest characters she actually is, not to give anything away, but she very seldom is dishonest to you. Like that the feedback you get from her is 100% honest, which kind of goes against this idea that you don't know people on the internet and they could be lying.
Right. Now
The game
she's
is predicated on-
evasive. She's not dishonest. But
Yeah.
there's things that she won't tell you.
Yeah, but she
Yeah.
won't like flat out lie
Right.
so far, we think. Pretty sure about that.
And Colin's an interesting character too, like very social guy. Like it's going to come up in a bit, I think, maybe depending on the path. But the line that I think is really interesting here is this guy who's always very jovial. When you really push him on M, even he too becomes kind of reticent. I was expecting up to this point that, oh yeah, Colin's the guy we're going to talk to. Who'll give something away because it's just sort of in his nature as the player character observes. But even he closes up and he says something that's kind of ominous. He says M was friends with everyone.
Yeah.
Which is like an oddly cold, weird, serious thing for this guy to say. So was there a discussion or something that you guys consciously pursued or thought about with Colin, suddenly having this change of persona when M is brought up as well?
Yeah, we actually did talk that through, and part of it had to do with the fact that Colin just doesn't know how to talk about it. He's not all that good about talking about his feelings all the time. So he doesn't even really have the right words to really express what's happened. So he gets a bit stuck. So unlike some of the other characters who are just not talking about it, Colin's kind of not able to talk about it.
Yeah. No, it opens up overt hostility in almost every other character, honestly. And with Colin, it just sort of was like, strange distraction, and then he kind of like walks away.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit about that. This episode really focuses on the school dance as you go along. It's that thing with them is still there, but you don't really gain any new information in this episode. You just push on people, and they all push you back in some way or another. Talk to me about writing that and being like, is this really going to be an episode where we don't like give up a piece of that?
You should start with that because
But you're the one who had to write it. I mean,
Yeah.
you had to.
You were under orders, but we got nothing to give this episode. You got to make it cool.
What about a
anyways.
hint? They're like, no, you're gonna be shut down. Which I know when we were talking about it, Miriam's like, it's very realistic that the player isn't a excellent detective and
This
can't
is a
figure
great
it out.
thing to say at this scene too, because this is where Sigmund,
Oh,
who's a
right.
he, is being a terrible detective. Like at this
Yes.
part,
Yeah.
this is like the worst gambit ever.
So
You can't even fool Colin.
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, it's just bad sleuthing. Like any detective would tell you, don't
Which I think
don't
is
fake
like
an injury. Like
really funny because unlike a lot of other stories and games and things that you read, like the player in this game isn't necessarily a great detective. Like we let the player just be like
Kind of
you know,
struggle
normal.
along.
Yeah,
Why
struggle
can't I
along.
figure this out? Well, 'cause-
But I think also that at the heart of this episode, Heather did a really good job of making something fun happen at the school with the party and just exploring that aspect of school life. So if you want to talk about that a little bit more, like writing the party.
Oh, okay. Should we talk about it when we're at the party or just?
Oh, I guess.
I mean,
so.
we'll get to the party, and I think the party itself kind of brings up the ultimate question at the end. For now, we see again, like going back and consulting with Nora and having her be this person in your life that is not there, but you can talk to.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting in terms of the sleuthing part of it, is that in a lot of games and in a lot of books for kids about sleuthing, the sleuth is always considered preternaturally smart. You know, like they put things together that nobody else can see.
Encyclopedia Brown, and yeah.
And our sleuth is not extra smart. Like our sleuth is just kind of like,
Normal.
I'm just a kid. So I like that. Like I like the idea of like we were like, we need a game about love and romance, but we need to have a plot somewhere in that game. Like we can't just have like a game where all you do is go to school and date people, which I think is like in this genre what most games have.
Yeah.
So we put the mystery in basically to create a handle for relationships. Like one thing that detectives are is people who get to make relationships that are pretty instrumental. And this detective is very bad at making instrumental relationships.
Yeah.
And the point of the game is that most relationships should not be that way. Which I don't think any of that was conscious. Like it wasn't like we're going to undo the trope of a detective by making a kid who's a terrible detective but is hopefully very good at making friends.
No, and a lot of like Japanese visual novel dating sims will also have like an overarching plot of a mystery, but in that usually it's someone gets murdered. Like
Yeah.
it's even further out. At least here we have a sense that M's story has something to do with the end of a relationship or an incompatibility therein. So I don't think it feels natural. But
Yeah.
you see actually in this episode, I think too, I don't know if you guys want to talk about this, like the character is being pulled more into their own life at this school as they get more into it. And the episode actually ends with a conversation of like, I don't know what's going on with M. Like, I'm busy with my own friends.
Yeah.
Is there a conscious sense of writing this episode that it's starting to become more about the character and the characters we actually see in it, and the M thing is starting to threaten to pull away a bit?
Well, like you mentioned, I think the M thing was a way to get the character involved with the other characters, give the player an excuse to talk to them and have conversations with them as the player makes relationships with them as well. And it's like Miriam was saying, a very natural thing that the mystery just doesn't solve itself and kind of fall in your lap. And here's your clue, and now we know. It's
Right.
a very real life that you're trying to figure it out, but it's hard and you can't seem to quite get those clues that would naturally pop up in.
And the whole
Yeah.
time the mystery is unfolding, life is still happening.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
you don't put your life on hold to solve this thing. Life is happening while it's all going on. So
Or it's kind of like, 6 Feet Under started out being a show about a funeral parlor.
Yeah.
And each show was sort of formulated around a death. And I really liked the first season for that reason, that there was a really kind of family drama took a backseat to what was this character's death story. But I think by the time they got to season 3, they were like, oh man, these characters that we've created, this family is so fascinating that they stopped having the gambit of like, what does each death teach us in each episode? And so I think part of it too is as we're writing each of the other characters, we're getting more and more attached to like Abby and what's Abby's story and Marcel and what's his deal. And M in this episode starts to feel really insubstantial, right? Like we don't actually know who M is. M is friends with everyone. Like maybe M doesn't exist. So maybe it's, at this point, the player's like, there's no M, like,
Yeah.
that's not a real thing.
Or you, the player, are M, and you had some traumatic accident. Like, again, like all these things that would happen in a Japanese visual novel, like just like crazy, huge, metaphysical even twists.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
M's, like M's not the turkey.
Yeah.
I'll say that right here and now.
Okay.
Tumblr, M is not the turkey.
But no, I mean, and this is absolutely the most dating sim episode yet. No question about it. Like, you actually go on a date to a date. And you have, like, scenes like this that are really nice because they show that gradual coming together of teenagers who are insecure about who they like and who likes them. It feels natural. You do talk to everybody as you go through it. Talk to me about the opportunity to ask out more than one person and how you were going to structure that and what you want the consequences to be and just, what was the process there?
It's when we were talking in the story room, we discussed how when you're young, you can like more than one person and you might not be sure and you might say yes to one person and someone else. Another opportunity comes up and you're like, oh, I guess it's not, we wanted to leave it open to players who might have a crush on more than one character. And there might be players who just have a crush on one character and then they just ask out one character and that's okay. But we wanted to give them the chance to explore if they liked multiple characters in the game.
And Marcel is kind of like the coolest character. Like, did you ever feel like maybe there was, and it's like, what if people like Marcel or someone like Marcel, but he lacks warmth to the point where, do you feel like there's a risk that a person might be like, well, I want to pursue this kind of person, this person of this gender, or whatever, this is my sexual orientation, but I don't like the person I'm supposed to go after. And, what are you supposed to do then? Or do you think most players like, well, whatever, I'll give them a shot?
It's interesting because another one of our writers really loves Marcel. And Marcel wasn't my favorite character either when I played the game, but it was interesting to hear this other writer's reaction to him because he loved him, and I'm like, wow, it just depends on your personality.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I think it's a really cool thing about the game because he's a little standoffish. They're all different. Whereas again, in that Japanese visual novel, for some reason, everyone's wonderfully gregarious and they all love you to death, right? Whereas in LongStory, you allow the characters to all be kind of different people, and it's possible you might be attracted to somebody that you don't necessarily find the most likable. It's a nice, really realistic, relatable part of it. Yeah, fun-ish. What's up with this guy? Now, you were saying you don't like him as much. Do you think you gave him more of an edge than he had in this episode than previously?
no, I don't mean I don't like him as a character. Did I?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Your first edit, we were like, too mean. We need to make Marcel nicer. Heather really doesn't like Marcel. We edited Marcel for night. But you were excellent at writing Abby. Yeah. I have struggled with Abby all my life. I cannot write a sunny, bubbly character to save my life. So all my Abbies would come out sounding like she was like, I don't know, just way too chipper. And you got her perfect balance of like friendliness and openness and like, yeah, I was like so impressed. But with Marcel, I felt like you definitely you made him mean.
Now you're stuck with it. Mean Marcel.
But I also think like regarding the whole choice and personality stuff, I think part of it too is that as the game has been written, their personalities have become more emergent. Again, because we also are settling on backstories for a lot of them that are a bit different than maybe I would have imagined for in episode 1. So Marcel is, his prickly demeanor is for sure a front, and we hope that people know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think too. I had sort of tried to run all the routes with character, but I was always playing a male with he, him pronouns, so conventional. So when I would actually like sort of hit on Marcel, part of me was thinking was part of this kind of written to show the reluctance of teenagers who are having those kinds of feelings but aren't necessarily secure about them, and who creates a certain standoffishness and like, I don't know where this is going, so I better be careful.
No, but there is this weird thing with Marcel. I think that when you play Marcel as a gay male, like boy to boy, a lot of his meaner flirtations come off as much more aggressively flirtatious, I think. That like there is a thing about how, I don't know if you noticed that, but there's like a gendered element to flirtation. So when you're trying to write statements that are sarcastic and kind of friendly,
Yeah.
that's the hardest thing to do, because like in a context where you're like not playing, like when we started writing the game, and you were only able to play as a girl, and so Marcel was only ever flirting with you in the hetero context.
Yeah.
It was a very different kind of flirtation than when he does it when you're gay, I think. Like, but that's just me. And I'm trying to remember, there was some scenes in some of the other ones where as soon as you could start playing it as a guy, because Marcel has his issues with being with gayness, like in the first episode, because he comes from Dubai, and because we were writing it that he could only be dating a girl.
Right.
It was much more natural for him to say like, oh, I saw M kissing a girl, and so I think that is weird. And the player's like, why is that weird? And Marcel's like, well, they don't do that in Dubai. If you start playing episode 1 as a guy dating Marcel in a gay context, then like 2 scenes later, he's like flirting his face off with you and like getting you to come and do stuff. And I was like, that's not really consistent with Marcel's character.
No,
I guess we can't do anything about it now.
No, but in this episode, if you ask him on a date and then you have a sort of text conversation with him, at a certain point he like basically asks you like, do you really know what it is you're saying to me? And if you say yes, absolutely, this is a date with 2 people, he's like, okay, that's fine then. So there is that moment of like sort of piercing that, and I think it's really well done. I mean, it's good. We could talk for hours about any of this stuff, but Turkey Hawk also I think is a really interesting character, and how it's emerging as a character. And what I wonder is Turkey Hawk for you guys sort of a love interest route that you put in here to pursue for people who aren't necessarily comfortable with pursuing a love interest with a person where it's more sort of prickly and back and forth, because Turkey Hawk's love is unconditional. And I guess is that the purpose to a certain extent, or what do you feel? What story purpose is Turkey Hawk?
I think Turkey Hawk is so interesting because Turkey is like so sweet, and there's so much you don't know about Turkey, like what's under that costume, and you have to if you want to date Turkey, you have to take a leap of faith. So that's an interesting dynamic with any relationship.
I mean, it's the closest thing to like surrealness that this game has, because like, is that an adult in that costume? Like, or is it another kid? Is there anything in there? Is it like Persona with Teddy? It's okay. Well, first of all, will this be revealed in time?
Like we would tell you anything
about
that. Nice try.
And do you think there are people who are, who end up with Turkey Hawk?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's people who definitely love Turkey Hawk.
They ship Turkey Hawk?
They absolutely do.
Reveals their personality to you slowly, and over time becomes quite interesting if you date Turkey.
I think also the idea of Turkey is it did come in just as a sort of like a pleasant sort of a diversion from having to make real relationships.
Yeah.
We keep talking about Turkey, but I keep going into it. But anyway, the reality of Turkey was that like we actually got feedback from players saying we want to ship Turkey, so you have to make Turkey dateable. And so we just ended up having to do that, because if we didn't include it, they would be mad at us. And then once you make Turkey a dateable character, they can't just be like a mascot who has limited speech functions and just sort of hangs out and points at things and gives you muffins.
Right.
So then we started having to figure out how to make... So I think it was like it was you who came up with the idea of Turkey's motions being... You being Suzanne, in like brackets. So the Turkey had sort of a vocabulary of movement that we could describe through words that really allowed a lot more kind of diversity in how Turkey communicated to you. But I think also Turkey is a bit about that in the final analysis, you kind of do need to communicate to have a relationship.
Right.
Maybe that's why Turkey's so verbose when you text him.
Mm-hmm.
He's very eloquent.
I've never texted Turkey. Okay.
You should
So
text
Turkey. Now I'm just unprepared. I didn't realize. You can actually start exploring the nuance of Turkey Hawk.
Yeah.
I'm so busy hitting on people. What am I doing? All right. And now here we're back talking to Nora, and I think this is the scene too where I started to feel like, there's something about Nora, even though you like her, I like Nora. I mean, I relate to what she represents, but she's almost kind of like, I don't want to say pushy, but you can tell to a certain extent she's really interested in your life because she's got very little going on in her own. Mm-hmm. And have you guys talked about her as somebody who becomes pesky, and is that kind of a conscious part of how you're writing her, or is there an assumption that the player is always really interested in talking to her all the time?
I think Nora started out as the kind of person who's in your life, who's your enthusiastic cheerleader, and having somebody who's very interested in your day-to-day details, whatever their reasons for that, I think is kind of an important part of being like in school or anything like that. Like it's nice to have a cheerleader.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that friend who's like, you're awesome. So I think Nora plays an important role. But as the season develops, you start learning more about Nora, and there's more dimension to her character. And it's not necessarily strictly all cheerleading all the time anymore. So you have to start working on that relationship a little bit more.
Yeah, or if you start to date someone, I'd be interested to see where it goes, will that begin to supplant your relationship with Nora? If you were to start going out with Abby and she becomes your confidant, she's your girlfriend, it's going to start to be strange to still have Nora be texting you constantly. What's Abby going to say about it? Do you guys think there's going to be some tension there if you don't go out with certain people? That their feelings for you will start to change as well? So that's something you guys have talked about?
You keep asking us to give away things.
No, just, you guys have plans? Because I think up to this point, your relationships with most people don't seem to affect your relationships with everyone else.
Yeah.
And is that a part of where we're going?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
There is going to be some action with ideas of sort of like loyalty and whose side are you on, and what's
right.
Like why are you doing what you're doing?
Cool.
You're hurting me. So things will get a bit fraught. It is a junior high school. I mean, if there weren't drama, then it would not be a realistic recounting of the age of 14.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make sure we put that in while being sensitive to the fact that I think we really do want people to be feel like they're in a space that is safe for them.
Yeah. And it's always interesting.
Speaking of which, Jen, Angry Jen.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see anyone from Hannah for Jane off on themselves, off by their own, and see their own individual personalities emerge. We saw it in the previous episodes, and I think this is the first time we see Jennifer totally by herself, and immediate anger.
But also, can we just talk about how Jen is totally in love with Colin, and that's a major factor in Jen's personality?
Go on.
Jen is totally in love with Colin, and Jen really wants to date Colin, and so we're trying to work that as a tiny C or D plot, is that Jen is really, really wants to date Colin. So if you're dating Colin, Jen is not your friend.
Okay, so this is the kind of thing we were talking about, where these decisions will begin to emerge in the story, and because there's not really much hint at it here, or at least in the way of the routes I've played. If you had pursued Colin up to this point, would you have seen anything? Would you learn any more about Jennifer and how? Yeah.
There's a part in the Hannaford in the Notebook where if you read a part of the Notebook, you find out that Jennifer has a crush on Colin. That's the first time. Depending on what you look at.
And look at Colin, that oblivious dummy.
Yeah, Colin has no idea, and you can ask Colin to the dance if you want. So much awkwardness. And of course, I'm playing the route where you manipulated Colin, so Colin is not going to the dance with you.
Right.
Which is I was excited when we made that decision. If you manipulate Colin, then he's not going to say yes. But if you've been nicer to Colin and you didn't try to manipulate him in the second scene, then Colin may say yes to you. Right.
Did you guys ever give any consideration to not having all the romance options accessible depending on what gender character you were? I mean, understanding that the great thing about it is that you can do anything, but did you ever feel like, that's a realistic part of the experience of having a sexual orientation, that some people are not going to share it? And is that something you feel like is missed out on, or just talk to me a little bit about that?
I think the way the game unfolds is if you're nice to somebody and you ask them out, they'll go out with you. Yeah. But if you're not nice to them, they have feelings, right?
Right.
The sexuality angle is complicated.
Yeah.
There are we have variables to handle the art that you choose and the pronoun that you choose. But in the world of adding a variable for sexuality would have complicated things extremely. It would have meant more paths, because then you would have had to write in if Marcel is we've decided Marcel is straight, for example.
Right. So in the world of Long Story, the context of a date is more about friendship and who you like and who you want to be and spend time with.
And romance. I mean,
Right.
there's going to be some kissing, I think, in
Yeah?
the future. There'll be some hanky-pank.
So fans
Very,
can-
very, like, minimal hanky-pank.
Right.
There will never be long story nights.
Right.
But, like, there will be. It's about intimacy. So, we did kind of have to make everybody canonically, enthusiastically bisexual.
Yeah.
Or pansexual, I
Right.
think, if we're going to include the idea that sexuality is a spectrum.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it would have been really, really hard to write. And also it would have been, I think, it is meant to be like an ideal universe. And in an ideal universe, the person that you like may not like you back, but it's not because of something you can't control, like their sexual orientation. Gosh darn it. It's because of something you've done.
That's a great answer. It's about the universe it's in. This scene is interesting to me because when you find out that Marcel's been giving Colin his homework, it doesn't seem totally characteristic of Marcel. And maybe again going back to just a little bit of his iciness and his standoffishness. I thought this was a really interesting moment for me because typically I would play not pursuing Marcel. So him being cold and but still willing to help others is kind of like a nice moment of contrast. Talk to me about, that decision to bring the two characters like that together in that way.
That was your episode.
Yeah, I know. I think I guess Marcel's more of a, I can't swear again, I was going to say smart ass.
No, you can't. That's okay.
Marcel's more of a smart ass than an actual meanie. So sometimes his lines, and I know I interpreted him more mean when I started too, and you guys were like, he's not that mean. And I was like, okay. Because deep down, he does want to help his friends. And I think that's what I don't even remember us having a big conversation about it. I think it just seemed natural that Marcel, who's smart and has an easy time in school, Colin's having a hard time, he'd be like, yeah, I'll help you out. It wasn't a big conversation about it. It's like, that's what Marcel would do.
No. He's not. I don't think he's angry about Colin helping Colin in that scene. I think he's a stickler about handing in his homework.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
it came on these conditions. Like, I'll give it to you, but I need to be able to hand it in. So he's angry at Colin for not holding up his end of the agreement, but not for making him cheat. Like, he's angry he got caught. I don't think he really cares about the school system. He thinks it's pretty dumb.
Yeah, Marcel is deeply frustrated with the school system and having to repeat things and having to relearn things he already knows. So that's a thing about it too.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a bit of a twist too, because Colin's this happy-go-lucky guy who, as far as you know up until this point, he doesn't have Marcel's attitude, so his life is a lot happier and better, and yet he's about to hit the wall. The consequences of not caring and not even wanting to think about how it does in school is about to affect him in a major kind of way. And it's cool because it is unexpected.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's fun about doing this game is that there are kind of threads of each character's storyline that do follow through from episode to episode. So if you had played the date scene with Colin, there's one part in the date where you can tell him that you think he's being stupid. And he becomes incredibly angry at you and basically cancels out the date. And it's like, I'm leaving now. You called me stupid. So he has a lot of sensitivity about his capacity to do school.
Yeah.
That's something that if you were playing the Colin storyline, you'd be like, uh-oh, things are going to go bad now. I didn't realize he was cheating, but, we know that he's not good at school. So I think that they deepen, and I think it's fun to play each thread to, you'll find out more about Colin if you keep playing his thread around that kind of issue.
Yeah, so then you find out a little bit about each character, even if you don't play their threads, and hopefully it's enough to sort of intrigue you and make you want to go back and go through their stories.
This is just the gossip scene. Maybe we can go by this one.
Now, it's kind of interesting that in spite of everything, Hannaford Jane seems kind of obsessed with you as a character. And to the extent that Nora sits on one shoulder, these three kind of sit on the other.
Right.
To sort of judge and bother you rather than support and help you. Do you guys do that consciously? Have them just jump in at a moment where you might have screwed up and be like, look at what you did?
No, but I like the image of the two of them on either side. They are kind of like a Greek chorus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But...
and it's strange because it's, in the first episode, I remember thinking one of the funniest things about them is that these are the three bullies and they're in charge of the anti-bullying club. which is kind of like an interesting thing with Principal Bob because he's the kind of oblivious person who would appoint 3 bullies to be the heads of the anti-bullying league. But you find out more that in some ways they are more complicated. They're not necessarily just the bullies that
They would
made out
never
to be.
call themselves bullies, I don't think.
No, they don't
No,
perceive
they would
themselves
never,
that way.
No,
Well, that's
they
interesting.
think
Yeah.
that they're kind of like powerhouses,
Yeah.
but
But the player character kind of perceives them. Do you not think they perceive them as bullies to begin with?
I don't know, because like the player sort of says like they're mean and then they make the player's life hell and
Yeah.
they talk to the mom about it, but I don't know if the player ever says, I mean, just full disclosure, I work for a lot of different, like my real day job is to work in a kids charity where we talk a lot about bullying. And so I'm a little bit fascinated by how that language has turned into something that I think parents use to police their children's social conflict. Like, like it's normal to have conflict when you start a new school. It's normal for kids to be doing things that are sort of mean to each other as they try to figure out how to be good people. So it's like I wanted Hannah for Jane to be a reflection of like, this is what happens when you take kids and you both give them a lot of social agency, but you also start policing like what is good social agency and what is bad without giving them a lot of pointers about ethical behavior, which I kind of think is what happens in schools now.
Right.
They use bullying to say, don't be mean. And then they don't say, here's what is mean. And
Right.
here's what is nice. And here's ways to practice meanness and niceness. They just say, be good kids. And then you see parents going out and doing things like yelling swear words. Like if you're out with your mom and your mom starts swearing at the shop person at Walmart because the sale isn't on anymore and she thought it lasted till Sunday. And then she turns around and says, don't be a bully. What are you supposed to do? So I kind of picture Hannah for Jane and company as being kids whose parents probably have taught them some sort of antisocial skills that they said, these are positive skills.
Right.
And so Hannah for Jane struggles with wanting to be a nice person, but not necessarily always knowing how.
Right. And yeah, do you think there's something they figured out that strength in numbers thing, but the problem is when you're with your friends, all of a sudden you have to be a certain way.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. Yeah, for sure.
That's why there's a really interesting dynamic when you see them apart. You learn a little bit more about each of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's saying when they're together, they get power from that, but they're also bound to it in a way that deprives them of themselves.
Yeah. And they're going to have problems, I think, moving forward in their lives.
Oh, yeah?
Well, because
Future
like the whole
episodes?
relationship things are happening to them. So like Hannah is the only person in the story who doesn't seem to have any interest in anyone else, right? Because Jen likes Colin. Now you do. And that Jane is kind of always on the phone with the Jane partner.
Yeah.
And then Hannah seems to just exist in this like world where she could potentially be in love with her 2 best friends. Like
Right.
That's what I kind of sometimes think is that at home Hannah has like a scrapbook full of pictures of Jen and Jane and isn't really admitting to them that she has a deep and profound love for both of them and can't choose.
And when that's threatened, she completely melts down.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's total loss. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Hannah's an interesting character because we know more about her based on what she could lose than anything that she really has. It's we just see that threat looming over her. And Principal Bob, this character intrigues me because I feel like he is kind of a fool. Like he's bumbling and he's overly optimistic and he's kind of zen and new age. And yet he kind of represents the values that the world of LongStory seeks to promote. Inclusiveness, helpfulness, kindness, and yet
I love that idea.
yeah, I don't know if you're laughing because I'm totally off base.
No, that's totally, I never thought of it.
But tell me a bit about Principal Bob and devising him and how he plays in the story.
He's so earnest. He's like so well-meaning, but he's not really. He doesn't really pay that close attention. So.
Like parents,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
like the family.
And does he represent sort of a generation gap too? Like if all of you would just sort of meditate and wear these crystals and magnets all your problems would be
absolutely.
fine? Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a little bit out of touch with like what is actually happening and can't even really imagine like the level of conflict that some of the kids are going through.
Yeah.
So.
And it's interesting because like well-intentioned people can be extremely dangerous. Like I feel too like he's going to do something to screw everything up. Even though he wants to help.
Wow, that's dramatic.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's true.
Season 3 ideas.
I'm one of these fan fiction writers you guys are talking about.
But it would probably be a matter of like bumbling into something
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not intentional, yeah.
not intentional. Yeah, you're right. Sometimes people can have all the best intentions and then mess something up with
Yeah.
their good intentions.